Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to Mahala Monday. Wonderful to have you with us. Yeah, it is the final Monday of the month, October, month 10. And my name is Dugald. It is great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we go any further, don't forget to like and subscribe. Please do that. Big honor for us. As always, I'm not alone. She's here. She's the only person whose sense of smell has developed to the level where she can smell minerals like gold.
Oh wow, Dugald. Jeez, every week you never cease to amaze me at the end of the day. Welcome, Dugald.
Hello, Rhoda.
Hello, Dugald. Welcome, welcome. So good to be back, everybody. So yes, it is an interactive show. Please put in your comments. I love it when you're interacting with us and chatting to us. And if you want to ask Dugald questions, you always ask difficult questions. You ask Dugald, not me. But welcome, everyone.
I wish you could smell gold. That would.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
If I could, Dugald, do you think we'll be sitting here, my friend? We'll be on a trip right now, eating the sunset and with our drinks in our hands, just chilling, brother, just chilling.
There you go. Yeah, you can see certain people are looking forward to holiday time.
Yes.
But be as it may, it is always wonderful to have you here at Mahala Monday, of course. So thank you very much. And please, as we said, of course, help us definitely subscribe and share and like the show and definitely share it so we can reach as many people as possible. Because tonight and today, the discussion we have, we'll be looking forward to for quite a while. Because this guest, you see, you get levels of guests.
Exactly.
And this is big. This is big. This is such an exciting moment to talk to somebody. And it's something that really takes all of us and touches all of us, especially on the African continent, and especially if we are in South Africa. Now, you might have heard the term African Realist. Well, we're going to find out exactly what it means. Does it mean also from a business and organizational perspective? Does it really mean there are opportunities on the African continent? Does it mean that? Does it mean that we are aligned or at least driven in order to achieve these successes? How do we compare to the rest of the globe? All of these things we're going to find out. We're definitely somebody who knows a little bit more than just a lot about it.
Definitely.
Like plenty about it. Because our special guest is Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi, who is joining us this evening here on Mahala Monday. I've penned 2 books, and you might have heard of them, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded and Reflections of a Son of the Soil, which is absolutely brilliant. So it is really a great privilege and pleasure. As you know, it's an interactive show, of course, so I'm sure you're going to have some questions for Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. So definitely send it through to us, and you can just send it in. But joining us then here on Mahala Monday, there he is, Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. Welcome to Mahala Monday. How's it going?
Hey, I'm laka cracker there, Google and and Rhoda. I'm well, and thanks for having me on your show. Really looking forward to the discussion. It's never we never have enough time to talk about Africa. We're so big, but thank you again, and looking excited to our conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. And it's really, as I was saying, and I wasn't even joking, it's a real privilege having you here because we've really been looking forward to this. But actually, let's just find out a little bit about Rutendo himself. So you hail from Zimbabwe, and you've been in, you live here in South Africa now. You've been here for about 2 decades, 20 years, if I estimate. What made you move?
I just hope immigration is not on this show because there are different ways of crossing the border. I'm just being naughty. So the key thing really, it was simple. I loved my country. At that time, with my wife, we had 1 son. He was a toddler at the time, and I was a young executive working for a technology company or services company, and there was great opportunity to grow. She was also in the IT space, and really we had no intention of leaving Zim. As you know, Zim at the time economically was doing well. They made some political economic decisions which were detrimental, and that was really the thrust of it. Things were going a bit pear-shaped. It was a triple-digit economy from an inflationary perspective. So when I left, inflation was plus or minus 586%. So it's mind-boggling. It was inflation on steroids, to cut a long story short. And we realized I think there were 2 main reasons. One was for obviously for peace of mind in terms of you've got a family, you want to make sure that access to the best, but we still had a heart for Africa and wanted to make an impact, and thus we chose South Africa. And also I was quite, I always wanted to be relevant in Africa, but still be competitive at a global stage. And hence why I said, look, I don't want to stay in this cocoon of an economic, social, political downfall where Zimbabwe was going through, as that at the end of the day might put a self-made ceiling with regards to Africa, or my perception of contributing to Zimbabwe. And hence the reason I said, no, let me go and the move to South Africa. So that's the long and short of it. And we've had no regrets since then.
Well, I can tell you something like definitely South Africa, like really enjoying just having you about, which is brilliant. And obviously you get to visit and you go. When you moved to South Africa, was it from the picture that is painted to people in Zimbabwe? Was it like everything that did it look like a land of milk and honey, especially with opportunity? I'm asking you that, especially with what we're going to be talking about tonight. Did it look like, hey, there's opportunity here? You know what I mean? Because sometimes I feel somebody that comes into a situation, often happens with me when I've gone to any other country, and I want to use the US here as an example, and no, this is in no means a dig at any of them, but spending time in the US, I always thought to myself, even if you're mediocre at business, you'll make a huge success here, because it just looked like everything was filled with opportunity, you know, compared to, because there's a bit of a resilience to people in Africa. We're born with and inherently we have like a strong resilience. When you came here, did it appear like, oh, this is really some springboards, here's opportunity, here's a chance?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the economics, the politics at the time, I mean, you're talking about 19 to 20 years ago, you know, South Africa was still just coming out of an era of Mandela's leadership. I think Thabo Mbeki was the president. I mean, coming from Zim, you know, where there's a shortage of foreign currency, there was a shortage of fuel, there was a shortage of everything, into a country where you could walk into the Pick and Pay hyper and everything is there. So from an economic perspective, from a political perspective, it was ticking all the right boxes. I got a job. Obviously, I was qualified, and it allowed me to get an opportunity in line with my qualifications and to invest in property, which was something that I would have battled to do in Zim under the current economic situations. The downside, obviously, which is a stigma to this day on the South African side, is obviously the crime and the violence, which is not the same in Zim. But I think in life you realize, you know, it swings and roundabouts, and ultimately the positives outweigh the negatives. And as much as I was in South Africa, I was still close to home, which was an advantage, because had I gone to the UK or the US, my parents at that time were still alive, and it would have been a challenge in terms of physically being in contact with my Zimbabwean family. So I think I got the best of both worlds, and we got the best of both worlds, and that would have been really a summary in terms of how I saw it. But ultimately, definitely, it was on the upside.
Yeah, that's good.
And then one of the things I noticed, it was Dr. Rutendo. So you proudly obviously wear that title. And what was your focus on getting your PhD? What was your reasoning for that?
Just a correction, it's the good doctor.
Ayo. I love that. I'm
trying to start my own series, you know, of the good Dr. Rutendo from Zimbabwe to South Africa. I don't know if it will fly, but coming back, I was actually working full time, and I never wanted to be an academic. I don't see myself as an academic actually. But what motivated me when I left Zimbabwe, I'd done my master's, and believe it or not, people don't believe that I've got my PhD now. It's international business strategy. I actually went through a season in my early years. I was doing a UNISA as an undergraduate program, and I actually I was failing my UNISA so bad. I think in my third year of doing second year, you know, when people tell you in your third year of doing second year, already that's telling you the journey. This was my undergraduate degree. I think I felt so badly. I had like 11 subjects I wrote in 1 year because I just wanted to clap it and move on. And I failed all of them. And there was a lot happening in my life. And I said, stuff it. Okay, maybe not to use stuff because I'm in trouble with my wife for using such a strong word. I said, no, this is not lacquer. That's a better word. Lacquer. And I was still in Zim, and I said, I'm going to stop studying it all. And I took a sabbatical from study. And I rose up the corporate ladder until I realized also that I wasn't going to get far without academic qualification. And then I restarted again. Like this was when I was, I think, in the mid-20s. And I restarted, I got the equivalent of my bachelor's, then got my master's. And I think it was after my master's, I was working in corporate. I was in South Africa. I was part of the executive driving business on the African continent, and it was an international company listed on the London Stock Exchange. And then I realized, okay, I want to make an impact in Africa. I want to be a subject matter expert with a blend of understanding how to do business practically from experience, but also bringing the best of global best practice and thought leadership. And I said, let me do my PhD, which was very unusual because I was in corporate, and not many people do a PhD when in corporate.
Yeah.
But the company I was working for was very supportive. The group CEO, I will never forget, he actually stepped up and said, Rutendo, we'll support you. And he did. And I did my PhD. It was hard labor. It was 4 years. I did it with this business school, but I have no regrets. And I enjoyed the topic, and that helped me position myself as a subject matter expert, but at the same time, with practical experience about doing business in Africa, I was able to bring the two together.
Wow.
No, that's fantastic.
Wow.
But I like the fact that you tell the story. You know what I mean? Why do we want to do something? We might not achieve the success straight away with it. There's always these little speed bumps and little potholes along the way. But when we go on, we kind of get to it. But let's get into the meat of what I want to talk about, and this is African realism, if I could coin the phrase that way. Now, and I want to ask you, from your perspective, what does it mean? What is what is an African realist?
Yeah. So in summary, Dugald, to be an African realist is a person who's optimistic, who's passionate about the continent in terms of its opportunity, taking into cognizance in terms of where we are now, what we can achieve, but strongly galvanized with the reality on the ground. Okay. So in other words, if we're talking about infrastructure investment and infrastructure growth, realizing that the average citizen in Africa doesn't have access to healthcare, doesn't have access to water, and realizing that yes, there's an opportunity in terms of taking that and fixing that, and there's opportunity in terms of doing that, but at the same time, mixing reality and accepting that opportunity comes with reality. So that, in summary, is for me is being an African realist, is having a true measure and balance of opportunity and reality.
All right. Wow. And when we blend that, when we blend those two together nicely in terms of the opportunity on the one hand and what the reality is, are we as a continent, are we fighting above our weight? Are we achieving what we can achieve? Or are we all just daydreaming here?
That's a very good point, yeah, Dougal, because look, just to share some stats, and I've shared this on a number of platforms. So Africa's GDP is 3% of global GDP. Africa's GDP is 3 trillion. And just to give you an example, a strong comparison, the US, which is the biggest economy in the world, its GDP is about 300 trillion. So we are 10% of global GDP. So I'm saying 300 trillion. Yeah. I'm now drinking something else. 30 trillion. So it's 10%. So we are 10% of America's GDP. Now, on the downside, we can look at that and say, gosh, there's no hope for us, or there is no, why do we even exist as a continent? But if you think as an entrepreneur, simple entrepreneur, is you realize, gosh, there's opportunity. That means 97% of the wealth is out there. It's accessible. We just need to position ourselves. One of the key things I always highlight is, and this comes back to reality, as comparing to opportunity or optimism, is that Africa, at the end of the day, you cannot embrace or you cannot unpack or unlock the opportunity of Africa by homogenizing it. In other words, when you look at things as one continent, one group of people, we've lost it. We're heterogeneous. There are 54 countries, 54 people groups. You look at us here in South Africa, right next to Lesotho, Swaziland, Zimbabwe. all close to each other, but we know the dynamics there, the economics there are totally different. And the reason I say that is that when you look and say, okay, how do we capitalize on the global opportunity? If we look at it from okay, guys, we're all going to sing Kumbaya, we're kidding ourselves. Right now, with like xenophobic attacks that happen, South Africa and Nigeria can be at loggerheads, and then you expect them tomorrow to sit around the table and fix things. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's also the reality. But what I would like to highlight is that it's absolutely critical that when you look at Africa, you say, okay, what are the big brothers in Africa from an economic cloud perspective? There are 5 countries that represent 50% of Africa's GDP.
Okay.
5. So we have 54 countries, but 50% of our wealth as a continent is in 5 countries: Algeria, South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. All right. So what does that mean? That means if you have a block party, now I'm going into the partying world. If you have a block party and those guys don't rock up, then you are actually kidding yourself, because it means that the guys with the power and the essence of the wealth of the continent are not there. But why is this important in terms of positioning us globally? All I'm just saying is that you need certain countries or certain sectors on the continent to take a lead so that when they start making the right impact, everybody follows through. And that's how it allows us to position ourselves to make it impact globally. You know, we talk about, I'll into this, like by 2050, it's estimated that 40% or 50% of the world's youth will be in Africa. That sounds great, but if those guys don't have jobs, if they don't have access to wealth or producing wealth in one way or the other, not just from an African perspective, but from a global perspective, we've lost the plot. And when you look recently at the riots in Kenya, Nigeria by youth, talk specifically to that, where you've got the youth who are unhappy with the current norm and are saying, guys, enough is enough. We need to fix that, but at the same time realize we need to position ourselves to be global capitalists. That's more or less the way I see it, Dugald.
And how do we position ourselves? I mean, what is the first thing to do? Because if we look at the global geopolitical situation, there's you know, from what I'm understanding, and if certain opinion pieces are to be believed, if you look at like sort of the BRICS bloc, and then you have the eastern side, and there's always a lot of talk of like the Far East making huge investment in, let's say, the continent of Africa and other countries. Is that the right way? And also those African countries that you've mentioned, they like sort of on the northern side. So geographically, you know, for Egypt, Algeria, they're not that far from us, whereas we're South Africa, we're literally at the back end of the continent. But if we look at that, how do we position ourselves? What is there that we got to do? Does it come down to something like political will?
It's political will, and look, it doesn't take away the importance of working together as a team. And I'll explain this, maybe again use economic examples, but it's important because when we can't talk about Africa, you know, as I think I was sharing earlier on saying that if passion was an asset, man, we would be the wealthiest continent in the world because we've got passion in Africa. You go to Nigeria, my brother, you got passion here. You go to Pufada, hey, you got lack of passion there. We brought like everything like a. You go to Sudan, there's passion. We've got passion, but if we don't translate that to practical wealth and capability, we lose out. So a good example is one of the big initiatives happening in Africa, which is absolutely critical, is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is to say, guys, there is opportunity here in terms of if you want to become a strong economic bloc, like the EU, where the guys came together from France to Romania to Portugal. Those guys have said, look, let's work together. Yes, Brexit happened, but they understand that by coming together, the power they have around that. African Continental Free Trade Agreement is doing that, saying, okay, guys, let's leverage off our own strengths. We know that they're big boys who've got clout, but let's work together so we can not only see value in Africa, but be more competitive globally. That's an absolute critical thing, because whether we like it or not, we are connected one way or the other. But when you look at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and what it's trying to do with regards to empowering the economies and the trade and the international intertrade in Africa, you have to bear in mind what's happening in the global perspective. And this is one of the things I always highlight, because I do a lot of master classes with business schools and whether it's Stellenbosch, UCT, you name them. Actually, I've stopped calling them master classes. I now call them Afri classes, because I said Africa is too big to have a master. So I actually tell the guys, it's not a master class, it's an Afri class, because that's how big we are. But coming back to the point, is that why it's important to understand what's happening globally. So you look, for example, one of the big geoeconomic, geopolitical battles that's happening in the world is the China versus the USA. I mean, we all know about that. And everybody is obviously, Africa is a key battleground. Now, one day I set aside myself and I said, hang on, I was actually in an event I was moderating with our beloved SARS commissioner, it's Kits Veta. And he said something fundamental. He said, geoeconomics will always trump geopolitics. And he was referring to the relationship between China and the USA. What people take for granted is, if you look at along the stretch of history, the USA's biggest trade partner is China, and China's biggest trade partner is the US. Irrespective of how much they hate each other, swear at each other, they depend on each other. The only thing is that on average, the trade between the US per annum, the trade between the US and China per annum is about $680 billion US. And 80% is a deficit to China. So in other words, China is exporting more to the US than the US exporting more to China. Okay, but the upside of that is that for those guys, what they're exporting is mainly manufactured stuff. Where are they getting the raw commodities from? From Africa, a big chunk of them. But what's my point? So I learned this. My point is that what America is fighting for, let's say Trump comes into power, he's saying, guys, he wants it to be the other way around, which any capitalist organization would want to. He wants to be trading more to China as opposed to vice versa. For me, the issue is not who's winning or who's losing. I'm saying, hang on, if we're providing the basic commodities that are supplying these two countries, we shouldn't be worried about getting ourselves into the battle. What we should be doing is say, how can we go up higher onto that value chain? So that irrespective, and I'm not compromising on human rights, on policy, don't get me wrong. I'm thinking as a capitalist. Irrespective of who's trade with who, if we're selling iron ore at $1, we should be working up and that ladder of trade and say, no, we've processed the iron ore, now we're selling it to you for $20 or for $30. That's what being a capitalist economist means to me, but still being relevant. So I'm just giving it in a nutshell. And that's a different kind of mindset. But sometimes we get bogged down in terms of the 3 trillion wealth on the continent, as opposed to say, gosh, how do we position ourselves and still get value out of this? So that's just an example.
I want to get back to that point because basically it touches on what you've just said. We once interviewed a gentleman, a guest as well, who does quite a bit in terms of aviation, and we were talking about the African footprint in terms of when it comes to global aviation, which equated to like something like 2%. So in terms of global aviation expansion, it can only happen within the continent. And that's why all these airlines from other nooks and crannies of the planet, they're all looking to get a foothold within Africa. Because that is it. You know, there's no more new flight routes that can be discovered, let's say, in Europe or in the Far East or even continental America. So, but I want to get back to that quickly. But Dr. Rutendo, we got a comment as well that we just gotta fly here quickly.
And it's from Hubert. Hi there, Hubert. Yeah, and he says, with the global economy facing changes and challenges, what adaptation do you believe are essential for South Africa industries, particularly in the fields of infrastructure, to remain competitive and, resilient?
Yeah, so, it's not an easy question. So the need for infrastructure development is there. I mean, let's focus on South Africa. Transnet, we know the debacle that is there. The issue in South Africa is not a lack of resources or a lack of potential investors around infrastructure. And I'll give you an example. It's obviously the political will that translates to implementation. And Transnet is a simple example. SAA is a simple example. State-owned enterprises that are teetering because of the shortfalls of state capture of the past. I look at a country like, I won't even go far, I'll look at Rwanda. For their state airline, I think they've teamed up with Qatar Emirates. They've just realized, we want to go global, we're a small country, let's partner with them. It's a similar deal that was on the cards in South Africa, it went under. Another good example is Boeing, the airline manufacturer. Its head office for Africa was in South Africa. 4 months ago, it moved to Ethiopia, which the GDP capita, I think the GDP for Ethiopia is about 100 billion US dollars. South Africa is 400 billion US dollars. So we are like 4 times stronger than Ethiopia, but a big manufacturing infrastructure player in the aviation space, moved to Ethiopia. What has been happening, 2 other big potential infrastructure, not potential, they're actually happening. There's what we call the Lobito Corridor, that is a railway network from Luanda in Angola that stretches through Zambia right into DRC.
Sure.
$14 billion investment by the US started last year. They've already pumped in $3 billion. I think President Biden was supposed to come in the month of October to inaugurate that, but I think there was a big hurricane, if you recall, in the last week in the USA, and I think that's why he pulled away. And it was going to be his first and last trip to Africa. He hasn't come to Africa for anything else, but with relation to that project, was going to come down.
Oh, wow.
You go to Mozambique. Last example, there's a big investment by DPA, which is a big financial investment company from infrastructure investment company from Middle East that's invested in the ports in Mozambique. Why? Because they saw the opportunity was what was happening in South Africa. So what is my point is that the challenge in South Africa, unfortunately, at the moment, when it comes to infrastructure development and growth, is not the lack of engineers, capability. It's the government having to put a platform or an environment or an ecosystem that allows for investors to come in and invest and see the rate of return. And unfortunately, things like state capture, the mafia cartels with regards to the construction, you guys know what I'm talking about, don't help it. And if we don't come out of that, then there's no other way out of the bottle, or out of this bottleneck.
I want to thank you very much for that question, and then thank you, Rutendo, for answering that as well. I want to ask you this, just given on what you've said. So there are many international companies, right, who's trying to get a foothold within Africa, even other countries for that matter. If we go just back to what you said, that there's a lot of foreign investment, but there would be a lot of organizations, businesses, companies that would want to have a foothold within the continent, and that would I want that to be the key phrase: foothold in the continent. A lot of them look at South Africa as the gateway to expand within the continent, right? Sometimes, and it appears because there's many companies that I've heard of and that read about that are trying to get a foothold here, because I don't think they're interested in 70 million people. They're looking at 2 billion continental citizens here. So they're not just interested in the population of South Africa. So and on the one foot, there's so much red tape for them to go through in order to come here. Now, there's the immediate gratification if this company successfully lands in terms of local employment, jobs, opportunities for us as people here within that organization. So it would make sense to speed it up and actually get it here because it's foreign investment, right? Straight off the plank. Yeah. Then we have this on the one hand, and then if the will not to really expedite this takes place, then it's almost whatever is gonna come is we're trying to keep for ourselves. So the argument could possibly go both sides on the same coin.
Yeah, so I actually call that, I write about it in my book as well, the African conundrum. Whereby on one hand, you've got the opportunity, and you can correct me if I've understood your question, right? And on the other hand, you've got the reality of the problems not allowing the problem to be solved in the way it should be done. And it's a conundrum. I mean, I've given you a negative story on infrastructure. Well, I say a sad story in terms of infrastructure. Last week, this time, I was at the launch of a big multinational US company. It's the same US that also has supported in terms of key things with regards to governance of the continent, which is the right thing to do. I was at an event where they've just launched one of the biggest data centers in Africa on South African soil. It's like the ambassador, the US ambassador to South Africa was there. It's in close to the airport. Big investment, hundreds of millions of US dollars. But even though there are challenges and concerns, it boils down to the risk appetite, which is an important element, because another thing that I also highlight is that for you to be in Africa, for the guys who be successful, they have to have the long term or the long game. It's not a T20. from a cricket perspective.
Yeah.
It's a 50-over test series, and it's over 5 days. And the guys who've been successful on the continent, talking about even South African-born multinationals, I'm talking about your Anglo-Americans, I'm talking about your Rembrandts, those guys, your Sanlems, I can go on forever. Those guys have been in the game for a long time, and that builds resilience, it builds familiarity, but it also gives you a strong foundation to go global. So coming back to your point, and I hope I've answered it, is that it's a mixture of both, but at the end of the day, it also delves down to your risk appetite as a company coming from outside internally or vice versa. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you have, because, you know, I'm just thinking that somehow we almost like we're also our own worst enemy. You know what I mean? That is
you're 100% right in terms of the only people who can influence change on the continent is us. And I believe, albeit we've got challenges in different countries, different regions, there's a burgeoning growth of leadership mindset that is changing. And you see shoots of it in different countries at different times. And I'll end with this. I mean, you can talk Rwanda, you can talk even Ethiopia, they've got short ones. But I'll use South Africa because it's a good example. One statistic I tell people, I said, don't take for granted what you have. And I give this statistic, is that since 1950, globally, it's estimated there have been 450 coup d'etats, okay? 220 of them have happened in Africa, okay, of those coup d'etats. Of those 220 coup d'etats that have happened in Africa, plus or minus 109 of them have been successful. There's actually one that happened 3 months ago in DRC, but was unsuccessful. So I always say to people, we are subject matter experts in Africa when it comes to coup d'etats. We should be consulting globally. Having said that, oh, that's a joke, by the way. Just I was seeing your face, getting worried. But having said all of that, South Africa, if you look at the last elections and the history of South Africa since, obviously, apartheid and we came out of it, we've never had a coup d'etat. If you look at the judiciary system, you look at the political system, when it comes from a democratic perspective, when it comes from a separation of powers, it's actually intact. GNU was never forecasted the way it's working now. Yes, it's on brittle ground, but any transition is always on brittle ground. So if you take those positives, you go to Sahel or the middle of Africa, you go to Guinea-Bissau, you go to Niger, you look at Mali, you look at what has happened there, the violence, we're actually relatively doing well compared, even from my country where I came from. So when you start bringing that into context, you realize, gosh, we're not on ground zero. We're not on the apex, but we're definitely on the right road.
Perfect. I do believe we have a comment there, so we can just show the comment quickly. It's again Hubert. So how can we leverage international partnership or technologically advancement to bolster our economic standing and supporting our local community initiatives? Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. You know, the easy thing is to say leadership, but leadership must translate into policy, must translate into regulatory framework. The guys who have done it well, you know, people talk about Singapore, people talk about Japan. Those guys are not big. When you look at the biggest economies in the world, you know, probably Singapore is not there. But when you talk about the most advanced, technologically smart city country of the world, Singapore, I think, is number 2 after New York. But what had happened, it was leadership galvanized with the private sector implementing stuff. So, you know, I'll give you another example. I've seen a lot of countries that have seen an influx of China coming with low quality stuff. And then you see countries like South Africa that's actually said no to a lot of the stuff, which is the right thing to do. One example I used recently, Ethiopia, I was talking about this probably 3 months ago, put a law into place. This is Ethiopia. It's not the most advanced country in the world, but Abiy Ahmed, the president, is opening up the sector. He is going pro-green. Why? Because you know that global financing around infrastructure is pro-green. One of the laws is put into place. It says that they've stopped importation of diesel and petrol cars in Ethiopia, the first country in the world to do that. He says, I'm now only allowing people to import electric vehicles. People laughed and said, okay, but how many power points have you got? How many charge points have you got? he says, though, the reason I've done it is that if I'm going to access global capital, I need to show the guys, I know that all the global capital is aligned to green economy related infrastructure projects. Now, a mindset like that is ahead of its time.
Yeah.
It's harsh because it's easier to import cheap second-hand cars from different countries in the world and get it. I've been there when I was at Deloitte trying to talk around the automobile space, etc., etc. But I'm saying simple examples like that. And one thing is doing it, the next thing is implementing it. You look at Botswana, they took a strong stance with the De Beers in terms of wanting a higher stake with regards to the diamond mining in Botswana. Right now, there are challenges with regards to the global markets, how it's reacting, something Mercedes is going to have to stomach and work through. But you need leaders who are able to make those decisions, obviously for the benefit of their citizens, bearing in mind that they don't live in isolation, because you are not in a socialist world anymore. Partner with the right guys, but leaving it out. And when we have 3 or 4 of the right guys in Africa doing that, man, I believe it will create a critical mass that will take this continent forward.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow, wow.
You know what? And I like that the thing you mentioned about Ethiopia, because obviously there are organizations and businesses just licking their lips trying to invest with that sort of thing. And if they now forced to make a move, and they'll be standing queue, I'm sure, to do that as well, which is great, and that's what it's about. Now, I know we've exceeded our time a little bit because we asked you for half an hour, but I'm sorry, but this is a fascinating conversation. I blame Rhoda, but I want to touch with you quickly before you let you go, your 2 books, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded and the Reflections of a Son of the Soil. If you could share some insights in those books and everything on those.
Okay. Now, quickly, so Rumble in the Jungle came about in terms of I just wanted to give my own perspective about doing business in Africa. And it's related to a keynote that I do. And I was actually privileged to share the keynote some years ago when Theresa May, the last Prime Minister of the UK, came to Africa with the business delegation. And amongst the delegation, she had actually the CEO of the London Stock Exchange, David Schwimmer. And I hadn't done the book yet, but what inspired me. And really, Rumble in the Jungle was, I said, I want to talk about Africa. Everybody's talking about Africa, but I want to write, bringing on my own experience, case studies. I've done business in 20 different countries over the last 20 years. And more importantly, I also wanted to make it interesting, because people remember stories. You can talk about theories, frameworks, and somehow by accident, somebody reminded me about the Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle story. And the lessons from there's actually a whole framework I use in the book called Tito to the Power of RD, nothing to do with our beloved late governor, but where I talk about how it's important to understand the territory, which is the T, the role of innovation, which is the I, navigating through threats and opportunities, which is the TO, and then RD, which is relentless drive and determination. So taking that story of the fight, my own experience, and leading thought leadership, I put together, and it was really to inspire and equip people who want to do business in Africa, whether they're coming into Africa or going to the African space. So that's really, in summary, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded. And it has been endorsed by 10 multinational CEOs and heads of government. It's available in all the leading bookstores. I'm quite excited about that. Then going to the second one, which is Reflections of a Son of the Soil. Now, this one, it actually was a COVID project. It was during COVID, when we were locked down in our houses and we were not allowed to go anywhere. I said, look, every night I wanted to motivate people. So every night I'd post and research for an African proverb on the internet and post on my LinkedIn. And I was overwhelmed by the response. And the reason why there are 55 African countries, people don't understand this, is that, or 55 proverbs from 55 African countries, because in South Africa, according to the Africa Development Bank, the real Africa Development Bank, they actually realized Western Sahara as a state, even though Morocco and Algeria are still fighting over each other. So that's where that's why 55 came from. But really, I selected a proverb for 55 days and shared it, and I just got phenomenal feedback. And then after I published Rumble in the Jungle, I said, let me put this together into a coffee table book, and the rest was history. And it was published in August, September last year. January this year, it was published onto the. It was made by Exclusive Books as one of the most recommended books to read for 2025 in all their bookshops. So I was quite excited about that. But one different genre altogether. One is a coffee table style book.
Yeah.
But it shares the culture of Africa, which in itself is one of our biggest assets. Yeah. And I've enjoyed both books in terms of talking about them and framing context around them. So, and when I do my Afri classes, I always make sure that I bring a proverb from one of my African learnings, because it galvanizes our history with our foundations, with our learnings for the future.
Definitely.
Oh, fantastic. Wow, brilliant. Wow, wow. Definitely want to check it out. But I know Rhoda's got one more question for you, but before she does that, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's just been absolutely brilliant chatting to you tonight. Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously, one of the things that we have to highlight was the fact that you were in the Word Mag, obviously, and that you were interviewed, you know, by the team of the Word Mag. And I had a look at that. I mean, wow, what an interview, what an interview. And how was that challenge to you? Did you enjoy that?
No, it was great. I mean, I must thank Lisa and the team.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, they did a free photo shoot for me, so that was good, because it always pays to look good and not pay for it, brother and sisters.
There's Lisa and yourself.
Yeah, she was an absolute blessing, but the exposure that I got from that, because she had done a number of key celebrities, and I was actually humbled that were making an impact not only in South Africa but globally. Like Lira, SARS commissioner, it was a host of people. I think Mahala was another guy, a number of guys. So to be part, and you know, that's the thing, man, is that the challenges and the opportunities in Africa are so big. Not one person can capitalize it, not even a billionaire. You need to create a culture of positivity. And if everybody plays that part, and Lisa, through the magazine, through her involvement, and the interview, which just allowed me to share a snippet of my life, was absolutely phenomenal. And I really thank you guys again for allowing me and trusting me with your audience and having me tonight.
It's only a pleasure. So for everybody out there, if you want to go and read up the article, please go to www.wordmag.co.za and go and read up the article. It's really, really interesting. Yeah. It's a free magazine. You can download it and, you know what, go and have a look at it. And that's it.
That is it. Listen, thank you so much for coming on. Sorry we kept you a little bit longer than initially planned, but thank you for indulging us and sharing some of your valuable time with us. But I have one more question. Please promise me we're gonna hook up again, definitely, because after this discussion, there's just a whole floodgate now of questions, which I don't have the time for now. But in the next time, we could definitely talk to you again in the near future.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. So there you have it. I tell you what a guest tonight, and what an amazing discussion, and just the discussion points and the insights that was given. So Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi with us here on a Mahala Monday tonight. Rhoda,
wow. And we went over our time again. Sorry for that, everyone. But you know what? Whenever our topics is this interesting, and our guests, like you said, you got different levels of guests. And definitely, this was one of them again. So, yeah, wow, that's all we can say.
Yeah, and it's almost like an intervention of divine intervention, because I think that is the important message, what Rutendo was explaining. I think it's an important message for us to hear, maybe this time of the year as well.
Exactly.
You know, there's a lot of things happening. I think it is really important. And highlighting things like leadership, the example that he made with Ethiopia, you know, a harsh decision maybe now on the people, but if you've got but you got to see the bigger picture at hand in terms of what is much required. So I think that is actually a very clever move.
Definitely.
Imagine now, you say no more diesel, no more combustible engines, all got to be EVs, right? So you might not have electricity plugs and power points everywhere. Guess what we're doing now? We're building that.
There we go.
And everybody's trying to invest with that and do all these sort of things. And it's just a simple thing. Africa's a sun-rich country. Well, that's the assumption.
Exactly.
But in terms of that, so many spaces, and just thinking out of the box.
Exactly. And you know what, really, and I mean, this is something I know we've spoken about so many times, is the fact that why is Africa sending out our raw materials at a price? And you know what? We even having to buy that back at times at a higher, it cost us so much more, which was our products. It was our raw products. You know what? And this is where Africa And we all, as Africans, should come to realization, if we stand together as one, on an African continent, we have the power to give so much to the rest of the world. So we can empower ourselves as Africans. So for me, that is really stood out on this interview, Dugald, that we need to make it, and leadership. We need to speak to our leaders and tell them that, you know what, this is what needs to happen. We as Africans need to stand together, because why must we have a visa to go to travel in the rest of Africa? We should freely be able to travel within our continent to trade well, so that we can do this trade. So that stands out for me, Dugald. Very, very powerful.
And the one thing is, he never said that, but I kind of think this is a sort of a subliminal thing for myself, that we are doing things right.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
A certain African country might not be doing it right, but at least another country in terms of the continent is doing it right.
Exactly.
We are doing it right. We are positioning ourselves globally. And why I'm saying this is we realize, and we got to think long term.
Oh, yeah.
But what we got to realize with this, and this is what I really got from Rutendo, this is that the rest of the world is eager and hungry and has appetite for Africa.
For Africa.
In terms of the risk, the possibilities, and of course just being part of this. And like he said, the passion is here. So if you combine all of those, then,
yeah, you cannot go wrong.
Can only go upwards and onwards, isn't it?
Definitely.
But yeah, I tell you what a fascinating discussion. We'll just love to talk to Rutendo again as well. But thank you very much for being with us tonight. Hubert has got one more message there. He said it's more true now than ever before that Africa is not a country, but a continent of opportunities. What a way to end
there we go. What a way to end the show.
Yeah, what a way to end it. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for watching. And please do us the big favor, of course, to share this. And a special thank you again to Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi, who joined us here tonight on Mahala Monday. That is it from Rhoda and myself. You've got to look after yourselves and everybody around you, and we'll see you soon.
Definitely. See you guys. Have a fabulous week. Bye.
Bye.